Okay, we're going to start the Mishnah again on the amazing days. Hametame, hamedame, vamenasich. A person takes somebody's truma, contaminates it. Or takes somebody's chulin. At one time, people in Eretz Yisrael, they would eat chulin al taras hakodesh. They would only eat it in a pure state, not if it was contaminated. Thank you. And somebody goes, takes a sheretz, takes a rodent, and puts it on the truma or on the tyrus, something which was not contaminated. Hamedame. Person takes regular wine, cooling wine, and he intermingles into it truma. So what happens? So now the only person who's permitted to drink the wine is only Kohanim. So something which the market was a much larger market, if you can fetch a higher price, now has a limited market. So he's devalued the wine. But the damage is not visually noticeable, it's just wine, it's a halachic issue. Hamenasif. Want to take somebody's wine, pours libations. All this is classified as hezek shem and nikah. The damage is not visual it's purely halachic state. The shogi potter. Since we rule halacha, hezek shem and nikah lo shmei hezek, that a damage which is not visual in the physical sense is no liability for that damage, you potter. The Mezid chayiv, but if a person doesn't deliberately, rabbinically, we penalize the person, and he's chayiv, he has liability. Okay?
Why do you expect him to be there? The man is a damager.
He's not a damager. On the Torah level, he's not a damager. Damage means only if I physically diminish your item. And if there's no physical diminishment, you're not a damager.
But he's rendered this so it cannot be used.
Does it make a difference?
That's damage.
That's not damage. Damage means it has to be, because the examples of the Torah when it speaks about damaging is speaking now where the item is actually physically diminished, reduced. Ox gores, or a person goes and breaks somebody's vessels or whatever it may be. It's always in the physical sense.
Is there a correction to any of these?
No, cannot be reversed.
So you call it monetary.
Yeah, but the monetary loss is not visual, is not in the physical sense. It's halachic. I'll give you an example. The halacha is it says. Doesn't make a difference. If you steal something, right? You steal something, so the Torah says whenever you steal, you have an obligation to return the stolen object. Okay? Let's say I steal an object that's worth $10,000. And by the time, so I have an obligation to return it. By the time I return it, the value drops, it's worth $5. But I return the object intact as it is, so the victim who's victimized, he lost most of its value. As long as you return the object, there's no financial liability. So there you could say that's called groma. That's called indirect loss. Right? That's not direct, that's indirect. The Gemara says a person steals chametz before Pesach. Right? And then afterwards, he returns it after Pesach. You steal a trail load of chametz, $100,000 worth of chametz, and then afterwards, you return it after Pesach. Chametz, that's the possession of the Jew during Pesach. The halacha is you're not permitted to benefit from it. So you return the trail load after Pesach. Does not have to pay the man a penalty. What would be if that chametz would be destroyed? First, if it's destroyed, then you have to pay value of the value that it was worth at the time of the theft. So therefore, the shilei means the value. So if the item's intact, you pay, you just return the item. But if you don't return the item, then you have to pay value what it was worth at the time of the theft. Okay, but over there, nobody disagrees there. Because here we're going to have a machlokes, hezek shem nikah, shmei hezek, lo shmei hezek. If something is not, the damage is not noticeable in the physical sense, does the Torah hold the damager liable for damages? Or we say, no, that's machlokes amaroy. That we're going to have in the Gemara. But right now, one opinion in the Gemara is hezek shem nikah is lo shmei hezek. That the examples of the Torah, when it speaks about a damager, it's always diminishing the item in the physical sense, not in the halachic sense. Even though your action has caused it to reduce the value, that's not classified as a damager. Therefore, the Mishnah is purely a rabbinic penalty. Shogeg inadvertent, you have no liability. Deliberate, we penalize you because the Gemara says this man could create havoc in the Jewish community by being a damager, damaging things where it's in the halachic sense, so therefore we penalize him if he does it deliberately.
when a man usurps the right of somebody else's truma and gives it to the Kohen, he tithes.
Tithes truma, and then what?
He tithes the truma on behalf of another man, and the other man wanted to give it to this Kohen. And
You can't tithe on behalf of somebody else's. You can't. You have to have permission. You have to be appointed.
But if he did,
It has no value. It's not true. It's not true. Somebody tithes somebody else's produce on behalf of another person without being appointed as an agent. It's not considered a tithe.
It's not.
No.
What is it?
It's nothing. It's tevil.
It has no impact.
No effect whatsoever.
So what was the case that we studied where somebody takes the right to designate it to a
Now,
particular
Gemara
Kohen?
has a shaila. Gemara has a question. If I tithe from my tevil and somebody else's tevil, where the other person has a financial gain, because now his produce is going to be fully permitted to him, do we say schiyah? Would a person be agreeable there to forfeit the right to give it to the Kohen? Or a person would prefer it to take from his own and retain full rights to be able to distribute to who he chooses to distribute. That the Gemara leaves it unresolved. The Gemara doesn't resolve that question. But to do it where there's no question, it's not to the benefit of the person who owns the produce, it definitely has no value whatsoever, unless he's appointed as a shliach.
So tithing is not just a physical act, it's more than that.
Sure. Yeah, the Torah says you actually have to own the produce, that it should be effective. Okay. Now, it's interesting. There's more in Ksubis. There's not even, we say kimlim kabbalah. That the person does an action. That action is a double liability. There's the liability of the death penalty, and there's a monetary liability. Or Malchus, we say that you're absolved from the lesser liability. Malchus is less than death penalty, and monetary liability is less than death penalty. You're absolved. If the person's put to death, there's not even a question. If he was forewarned, that's kimlim kabbalah. The greater of the liability, that's what they rule on. The lesser, there's no rule. They don't even address it. What about if he's not put to death? Right? There was no hasro. And this person goes and he damages, and there's a financial liability. Does he pay? Marsh is also not. What about if he does it inadvertently? On Shabbos, inadvertently goes and he picks fruit, he thinks it's Sunday, and he damages somebody else's vineyard, his orchard. Now, Lachas, he doesn't. We say kimlim kabbalah. Because since the nature of the act is an act of chilul Shabbos, and if he would have been forewarned, he would have carried the death penalty, even though this situation, all that it requires is a chatos, nevertheless, he's absolved from the lesser liability. That's what Chaim Nisa showed me. We say kimlim kabbalah in every one of these situations. There's a discussion in Ksubis, what about Koris? That's when it's Mises Bezdin. The liability is the death penalty. What about a spiritual excision? We say kimlim kabbalah. So the halacha is we rule, we don't say kimlim kabbalah. Person the greater kiblei b'drabinei. We only accept what's the greater of the two. Rabba means greater. Okay? Not the lesser. Someone speaks, somebody goes into somebody else's truma. He's not Kohen. So the liability in truma is Koris. So Yisrael eats someone else's truma, so simultaneously. When is he a damager? When he swallows. So he's liable for eating when he swallows, and he's destroying it when it goes down his gullet. So we say kimlim kabbalah. Somebody asks a question, and Gemara says, why don't we kimlim kabbalah the moment he picks it up? He picks it up, puts it in his mouth. So he became a thief the moment he picked it up. And then, therefore, the financial liability is initially, Gemara says no. Because since he could bend down and he could eat it off the ground, if the only way you could eat something is by lifting it before you put it in your mouth, so then the act of lifting, of picking it up, is a necessity to eating. But since you don't have to pick it up, so lifting it is unrelated. I'll give you an example. Here's a question like this. The halacha is havor z'amus b'shus harabi. Person transports something 4 cubits in public domain. Person picks up a knife, public domain, walks down an amos, and stops after 4 hours. What's the halacha? He's liable for transporting 4 cubits in public domain. Correct? That's called havar zam shesarab. What if he picks up the knife, and as he walks, he pierces somebody's silk? Right? So he's a damager. On the way, so he first did the akira, but when is the malacha completed? Let's say he continues walking till after Shabbos. No, he's not liable. He has to bring the object to a stationary location. So there was never. When he pierced the silk, he was still in the process, the midst of doing the malacha. So Morris says, we'll say kimlei drabin. Maybe. Why? Because as the action that brings about the liability of death penalty is the action which caused the damage. See, when you pick up the object to eat, let's say you hold this kimlei drabin by koris. So when you pick up the truma is not a necessity for eating. So the act of lifting the item and being liable for koris are unrelated to one another. Even though it happens to be this situation, he picked it up to put it in his mouth, doesn't make a difference. When he picked it up, he became a thief. And when was he liable for the death penalty for koris? Scriptural decision when he swallowed it. But over here, so we say one has no relevance to the other, because it didn't have to happen that way. Because you're able to eat truma without picking it up, right? Picking it up is the kingdom, is the act of acquisition. But havar zam shesarab, transporting something 4 cubits in public domain, it's not possible to be liable unless you have akir and hanocha. So since he pierced the silk, he did the act of damaging before the malacha was concluded, so therefore the malacha and the damage took place simultaneously. Therefore we would say kimlei drabin. Okay? Good. Although when he pierced the silk, he wasn't yet liable. He wasn't yet liable.
He absolved the damages.
He's absolved. He's absolved. Even though when he became a damager, he wasn't yet liable for the death penalty. Because if he wouldn't, let's say he wouldn't have stopped. Let's say he would have continued walking till after Shabbos, the court would rule he was a damager. He never violated Shabbos. Correct? It's only speaking when he came to stop on Shabbos. He came to rest. So when he came to rest, so that action which caused the damage is the same action which brought about the liability of the death penalty.
Same thing as the case with the arrow. Because the arrow.
Well, we're talking about arrow. We're talking about an arrow.
Arrow is different because they have
No, there's a split second between going through the clothes and.
Wait, no. Tomorrow wants to differentiate. Tomorrow says it's not so simple with the knife. Maybe he's not going to be liable. Why? If you shoot an arrow, So again, you shoot an arrow on Shabbos, and the flight pattern is more than 4 hours. And in flight, it tears through somebody's silk. When you shot that arrow, you can't retrieve the arrow. So at the time of when you put it into flight, you shot it, for all intents and purposes, it landed. So because you couldn't retrieve it, the conclusion was inevitable, right? We see it as it concluded. So therefore, that's how you see them simultaneous. But here, let's say he would stop. He would stop, and let's say he pierced it after 2 amos. He walked 2 amos, tore through the silk. Let's say he would have stopped at that moment. He wouldn't have been liable. Correct? Because he have to walk 4 hours. And he caused the damage after 2 amos. So if he would have stopped then, he would not have a liability. See, even though the Gemara says that factually continue walking, but since when the damage actually took place, the action itself wasn't yet identified as part of the malacha, it was only later, because he walked the additional 2 amos, maybe we wouldn't take him then the job.
He wouldn't be responsible for the damages in that case?
No, he would be.
He would be, right?
He would be, but if it would be an arrow, he would not. Because an arrow, once the arrow is shot, you can't retrieve the arrow. So you can't stop after 2 amos. He shot it, it pierced the silk after 2 amos. Understand? 2 amos is like 10 amos. Because you can't retrieve the arrow. But here when he walked through the silk with the knife, right? At that moment, if he would have stopped at that moment, he could have stopped at that moment. He chose to walk forward further. So that action is not identified as an action which causes the death penalty. Although, after fact, we combined the two, but at that the moment of the damage, the action itself wasn't yet identified as an act of violating Shabbos.
It would be liable.
Therefore, he would be
So
liable.
we would differentiate
Which is-
between if someone already had walked 4 amos or 6 amos, between that and someone who only walked 2 amos.
No, but you could.
Because once they already walked 4 amos and they continue walking, eventually they're going to have to put it down.
They don't have to. What happens if he walk continuously? Let's say he
Forever?
caused the damage before Shkia, right before sundown on a Saturday afternoon, and he walks for another 20 minutes after Shabbos. So it doesn't have to be identified as neck. I'm just giving you an easy case where you walk 2
So
hours.
eventually, no situation on Shabbos, because eventually someone could just walk for 2 days straight.
And what about if I put it on a ledge where there's no mokum? You need $1, you need 16 square inches to be a
So
location,
there are a lot of options.
right? So there are ways that you're not going to be liable. Okay? So now we're going to talk about libations. Now, how do you do libations? Right? Libations, when you pour it from Nessa, you pick up the wine, you lift it, and you pour it. That's the way it's done. So let's say a person takes somebody else's wine, lifts it, and then pours it. So what would you do? It says in the Mishnah, you do it deliberately, chayiv. But if you say, kimlim drop me many, so one opinion is, the Nesach cannot be where he did the act of libation, because there'd be no liability even the Mazid. Because doing an act of libation before idolatry is what? Is liable for the death penalty. So again, whenever we speak about the liability of death penalty, we apply the principle of kimlim drabni. The liability is the greater liability, not the lesser liability. But the Mishnah says b'mezid chayov. So therefore, Rav is going to say, therefore, the Mishnah cannot mean nesach where you did the act of libations before idolatry, but rather means something else. Okay? So Tosas explains over here what's the machlokas. We'll see in a moment. This machlokas. When you do libations, do you have to lift it before you pour, or just putting your hand in the wine and swooshing it around? That's sufficient to be considered an act of libation. We're talking about on a Torah level, right?
Pour.
You don't have to pour. You don't. We have to. No. The way we hold the
You
halacha.
put your hand in and you sprinkle it?
No. You just you put your hand in the wine and just move your hand around, and you think for the sake of idolatry. Is that sufficient to become nesach on the Torah level? We have to lift it to pour. Even though you don't have to idol it, but if you have in mind for the sake of idolatry, that's considered an act of libation for idolatry.
But in terms of halacha, if you want to do libations of the halacha, you have to do a pouring. There's a pouring.
The question
That's
is, what about
it is. That's
what about
it
for
is.
idolatry? We're talking for idolatry. This is idolatry.
Right. But there's no. You don't have to do a pouring.
Maybe you do to be considered. To be
Well, that's what
considered.
you would think.
Well, that's going to be the argument here. There's a
Why would
question
you
that
think not?
the Mishnah. Why would I think not?
Why would you think not? Why would you think
Because
if you didn't do
in
the
the base of
pouring?
Migdosh, to do a proper libation, that's before it's fair.
That's what I'm saying.
For idolatry, not. As long as that is a semblance of what they did in the base of Migdosh, that's enough. That's Nesach. That's called libations in terms of idolatry. We're talking about carrying the liability of the death penalty. Right? We'll see in a moment. Itma. The Mishnah says menasech. The word menasech literally means pouring. Nesach. Rabba menasech mamish. Rab says no. Nesach menasech means literally libation. And yet says if it means libation, and it says in the Mishnah mezid chayov, shmuel ma'ariv. Nesach means he took yayin nesach. He took wine that you weren't permitted to benefit from, and he intermingled it. He mixed it into kosher wine. Okay? Madiyom ma'ariv ma'itamalom nasich. Shmuel says nasich means he took the yayin nesach and he mixed it into kosher wine. What does he learn, like Rav, that he actually did the act of libation? Because if he did the act of libation, it has the liability of death penalty. If that's the case, we say kimli dramine. Even nezid he should not be chayiv. Therefore, the nasach has to mean mixing nesach into kosher wine. Okay?
Avram, you with me?
Yeah.
Okay. V'idoch. Okay. So how does Rab respond to this? To Rabbi Yirmiyah. As Rabbi Yirmiyah says, the Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, Mishas Hagbo Hu Dekona. From the time he lifted the wine, he becomes a thief. Right? He becomes a thief. B'schai b'nasho lo have achas nisuch. When is the death penalty? When he actually does the pouring. As a result of that, since it didn't happen simultaneously, therefore he has the liability, the financial liability. Okay? That's why Rav learns Menasech means actual libations. Because the lifting is not a prerequisite to the pouring. So Tosfos explains, because Rav is of the opinion Nesach could be without lifting the wine. This is similar to eating the truma. You're able to, since you're able to bend down to eat the truma off the ground, you don't have to lift it to put it in your mouth. Therefore, the lifting is not a prerequisite to have the liability. Identically, lifting the wine to pour the wine for the avodah zarah, for the idolatry, is not a prerequisite for the nesach. So therefore, so the moment you lifted it, you became a thief. So now the question is, according to Rav, he learns Menasech means literally Menasech. What did he learn at Shmuel? That it means Ma'arif. It means taking Nesach, mixing it into kosher wine. Right? What does he have to learn specifically as he's learning? Omaloch, Ma'arif, Hainu Medame. Because if that's the case, the Mishnah is redundant. The case, first case it says, Hametami Hamedama. What's Medama? He took Truma wine and he mixed it into Chulin wine. Correct? So because he minimized its value, he has liability. So what's the difference when you take Truma, mix it into Chulin, you take Yain Nesach and mix it into kosher wine? Same thing. So we've already said you have a liability. So the Mishnah will be redundant. Therefore, Rav learns Nasach means literally the act of Nesach. He did the act of libation before the idolatry.
Rav says it's literal, and Shmuel says only the specific where it mixes, or all cases that fall into this category.
No, our Mishnah. Mishnah is Nezid Chayiv.
Right, but
Right?
Shmuel would say all things that would fall in this category of making it usher, as opposed to Rav who just actually said it means pouring.
No, the word normally Nesach, Menasech means doing an act
Yeah.
of libation. Except Shmuel says it's impossible. Here it can't mean that. Because it says B'mezid Yechayiv. Right? So,
Yeah.
but if you can say Kim Leim Rabni, how could it say Mezid Yechayiv? Therefore, we're forced to say here, Menasech cannot mean
Right.
Nisuch, it has to be Ma'arif. It has to be he mixed it. So Rav, what does Rav say? Let him learn Menasech means also Ma'arif. He says if that's the case, it's impossible because then you have two cases which are actually the same thing. It's redundant. If you're liable when you mix Truma to Chulin, so definitely you'd be liable if you mix Nesach into Chulin. So how do you, right? Because if I reduce its value, you're a damager. So if I take it from value to no value, because it's a surah no now, there's no question you're liable. So what does the Mishnah have to tell me, Menasech? It's a kolshkin.
Yeah. You know, she meant then.
No, but
Please
it's
tell
saying, no,
them
it's
where
B'chal
to-
Musayim Mono. It's not a no shim It's not a no shim. It's not a, there's damages.
Oh,
If I'm
okay.
right, if I'm a damager when I take it from 10 to 5, if I take it from 10 to 0, I'm not a damager? Of course you're a damager. Right? So therefore Rab says, Menasech cannot mean Medama. So how does Shmuel respond to this? Why is the Mishnah redundant? The Idoch Knosu. Now, we're saying now why the Shogeg is the damager potter, because we're saying Hezek Shen Nikolosh Mehezek. That unless the damage is in the physical sense, you're not considered a damager on a Torah level. So why Mazid, yes? Why would you do it deliberately, yes? It's a penalty. Right? So if it's a penalty, so if we penalize you when you take something and you only reduce it in value partially, so you reduce it totally, why won't we penalize you? Knosu lo yafir. Now, what's a penalty? A penalty, the concept is, the Chachamim feel they evaluated the situation and they said because of the nature of the act, you deserve to be penalized. But taking yayin nesach and mixing with the kosher wine, taking truma mixing, it's a different act of, it's a different level of intent. It's a different level of doing something wrong. So maybe in one situation you would penalize, the other situation you're not going to penalize. That's knosim miknos liyalfinan. Just because they penalize in one situation, they may not penalize you in the other situation, for whatever reason it may be. Therefore, it's not considered redundant. The Mishnah has to tell me, according to Shmuel, not only do we penalize it when you mix truma, even when you mix yayin nesach into chulin also. And what would the reason be differentiated? Mars will discuss it. I mean, truma is something which is available to most people. So you could say, you took truma which is available, you put it into the kosher wine, he minimized its value, because now only Kohanim can drink it. Where does a Jew have to have yayin nesach? Yayin nesach means wine that was used for idolatry, used for libations. He took that wine and intermingled it into something remote, Since it's remote, you say, they're not going to legislate a special penalty for something which doesn't happen that often. Right? Therefore, the Mishnah says, no, they do. It happens often enough that it has to be addressed. Therefore, not only do we penalize you when you add Truma to Chulin, even when you add Nezach to Chulin, we also penalize the person. Therefore, it's not considered redundant.
It's a Rabbanon.
Well, rabbinical. But you say if they penalize across the board? No. Each case is a case unto itself. It's a separate evaluation. When do we penalize? When don't we penalize you?
So, if a person renders somebody else's food non-kosher, the person's cooking, and he adds a few pieces.
The Mishnah is not discussing that.
No, but he adds a few pieces of non-kosher beef, which cannot be detected, and it's in too much quantity. So
That would be similar to the Truma.
So what happens in the case?
No, if he does it deliberately, we'll penalize him.
We will, but not.
No,
not
because
derisa,
no, rabbinical.
But not derisa.
Not derisa. Not
Because
derisa.
it's undetectable.
Because visually it's undetectable. It's only halachic. It's a halachic damage. It's not a physical damage. It's not, the item has been physically diminished. Because of the halacha, therefore, its value has been lessened. It's been devalued.
I understand. I mean, there's clearly damage.
No
As
question.
we think about it. but-
Sure.
But halachically, the midoraisa, there's no damage.
Right.
Or it doesn't.
He's not classified as a damager for this kind of damage.
What is he midoraisa?
It's probably, I'm not even sure if it's grumma. It's less than grumma. Grumma is a damage, but since it came indirectly, indirect cause, the Torah doesn't, the court can't rule on it. But b'dei shamayim, you call the damager. Because there is a physical diminishment, except it came through indirect cause. Here, the damage itself is only halachic. It's due to halachic reasons, and the physical sense is still intact. So maybe b'dei shamayim, maybe you don't. The person doesn't have that liability. To be continued.